In the previous episode of Build, we shared how you can use design sprints to help you test ideas out faster and get that much needed feedback. If you missed the episode, I've included a link to it below this video. And of course, anytime you want to institute a new process in your organization, there's going to be some pushback. So in today's Build episode, we're going to tackle how you can evangelize design sprints within your organization. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In each episode, Innovators and I debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. Today, we're continuing our conversation with Charbel and I, who has been a product designer for over 20 years and most recently launched Made in Public. Okay, Charbel, you and I have built a lot of products, and we know that even if our teams hate our current process, right, and we give them a new one, they're still going to be reluctant to adopt that new one because there's that fear of change,
Sure.
And we're going to get pushback. So how do we handle that pushback?
I think one of the ways I found to handle it successfully is to emphasize it's not a replacement to your existing process. It's a way to supplement, complement, or augment. Mm-hmm. And if you can run a design sprint in parallel, and you're really doing it as a side branch to what you're already doing, and it gives you an opportunity to learn quickly in 5 days, and then be able to integrate that back into your existing processes, it's super helpful.
Okay, so that's great in theory, but I know having to run a parallel process oftentimes for either a small team or even in a large organization can be a lot of setup. It can mean trying to carve out that time. So one of the key things to consider is what are going to be the benefits, right? Someone's going to come and say, why should we do this? How is it going to help? Great
questions. Why should we do it? How is it going to help? I think there are two key areas. One is speed of execution.
Okay.
And what comes along with that, with the sprint, is constraints. Mm-hmm. And through those constraints, you get clarity. So you're moving quickly. You're going from thinking to action in a quick way. And you're also constraining yourself so you don't have an infinite amount of time to decide what features, what angle, should we try it this way or that way. So you get to move quickly and you constrain yourself so you get to clarity faster.
Okay. So I'm sure for our audiences out there, there's probably going to be some pushback around, that's great on like a nimble team of maybe 5, 6 people, but I've got 10, 20, 30 decision makers or stakeholders. I'm not going to be able to mobilize my team fast enough. So how do we get to handle those folks?
Yes, I think you can work with those 10 to 20 or even 30 people to understand what are some big problems that you're facing and that you'd want to solve that are top priority, or they're really affecting and impacting your productivity and your flow, your ability to ship.
Even if they're conflicting?
Even if they're conflicting, I think you first start by gaining an understanding.
Oh,
so with a team that large, I've got 20 to 30 product managers and squads of teams of PMs and developers and designers, et cetera. You just gain an understanding. If you're that org leader, gain an understanding of what are some of the top big, meaty problems that are affecting the team and affecting shipping and product and affecting the business. And prioritize those. And then think about, if I could run a sprint, if I could run something within 5 days and gain clarity and be able to unlock some blocker that's going on across those 10 to 20, then who of that large group, who would make most sense to bring into this sprint? We're not going to stop the presses on everyone's workflow, right? Okay. But we can at least prioritize, run a sprint with some key players, see how that goes. In some ways, it's a look at it like an 80-20 perspective of 80% of the org is going to continue going as is. There's going to be this 20% or even 90-10. There's going to be this small experiment we're going to run. And if that's successful, then we could see if we could apply it to other areas or aspects of the org, no matter how large.
Of course, there's fragile egos. So some people are going to want to be in that special pool.
Sure.
Be like, why wasn't I picked?
Sure.
Yeah. So how do you message that?
Not easily. Not easily. It's not always easy. I think one thing I found be helpful is to communicate openly that we understand we have XYZ challenges. We're all clear on that, right? And hopefully you have consensus, you have agreement. And from there, we can't tackle them all at once. We all agree to that, right? And so I think you're gaining that consensus and that understanding, that mutual understanding, and then communicating. We want to try something that might help us start to chip away at the stack of challenges that we have. We're going to run small experiments. As those turn out to be successful and we learn from them, we want to continue embracing and permeating this throughout more teams and more people in the org. So it's coming, and if it's going to work, it's coming. If you have a deep interest and you have like you're raising your hand and you really want to be a part of this, please come tell me. If you're the org leader, if you're the business leader, whoever you are.
Sure.
I think that kind of openness and communication starts to also be a signal for you to understand who are the people who, as you mentioned before, who are the people who can become those evangelists and those change agents in your organization, those influencers, to adopt something new like design sprints, and then be able to take it to their parts of the org as well.
I think it also serves as a signal to see how open your organization is, right?
Absolutely. So
I think maybe some people may get disheartened as they do this exercise and find out that they're not getting a lot of interest. So how should they take that? I mean, it's not a reason to like send in your resignation letter.
No, not at all. Don't do that yet. I think one thing that I was just discussing with a CEO of a global manufacturing business is people need to feel involved. And that's, in my experience, in org development and innovation within an organization, especially large ones, that no one really wants to have something just told at them, and that this is the way we're doing things now. So introducing something like a design sprint into your organization that can foster and cultivate innovation throughout all your people, doing so by involving them. So first, it just starts with communicating that. We're thinking of doing something new. Who has some initial interest? Then, like you said, you'll start to see if there is or isn't. That might be an indicator that, are you really getting that kind of engagement from your folks? And as you test it and as you do small experiments and you see who continues to raise their hand and want to be more and more involved, and when you're not seeing that engagement, it may actually be an opportunity to run a design sprint on internal communications.
Okay,
So that's the beauty of it for me is I think you can run a sprint on any kind of challenge you have. It may not always be a business challenge in the product sense or in the service sense. Sometimes it may be about your internal organization.
And what happens if you get too much interest? Like everyone's like, "Ooh, yes, I want to participate," and then all of a sudden you've got your 5,000 person organization. I got things to say. I see things that are broken. I get this a lot when I go into places.
Sure. I think for starters, I think that's a great problem to have. I think you want that level of engagement, that employee engagement, and your people care about solving challenges in your business. It's far better than the opposite. Two, there is such a thing called mega sprints, and Jake Knapp's actually run mega sprints, which are pretty interesting, where there's simultaneous sprints happening in one large room. And now, short of that, I think to your point about the question is to get to a place where there's an opportunity for people to raise their hand, have a voice, to be able to add to the mix and add to say, here's a challenge I'm facing. And then it's really, I think, an opportunity to create a culture of that mindset. So I go back to design sprints not just being this rigid 5-day process, and the irony is it can be viewed as some rigid 5-day process, even though it's a sprint and it's meant to move quickly. The reality for me is that when you embrace it as a mindset, and that people in your organization, no matter if you have 5,000 people with 1,000 problems each, it's an opportunity to think, how could I solve this problem or test a new idea quickly? And can I use the framework of the sprint? Can I use the elements of the sprint to take action faster? And I think anybody who's leading an organization, no matter how small or large, would love for their people to have that type of empowerment and to be able to feel enabled and equipped to take action.
Now, there's also a lot of skeptics out there who might say, I hear what Charbel's saying, but I've tried something like this a year ago, or like 5 years ago, we tried lean or agile. How do I know that this is the new thing? So a lot of times the concern is, how is this going to be any different from what we tried in the past that failed miserably, and in the wake of it, caused a lot of destruction? Yes,
great question. This has actually been coming up recently for me, and I've been doing more and more reading and research on this. I think for starters, it's valid. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely valid to be wondering, great, this is just the methodology du jour, right? Like, this is now the new thing, and everyone's going to jump on this bandwagon. I completely understand that. What I come back to, though, is the point about the mindset. Mm-hmm. Lean can be thought of as a mindset. Agile can be thought of as a mindset. It's a way to knock down blockers mm-hmm. that otherwise impede you from trying something, learning from it, and iterating on it. So whether it's this model, that model, or this or the other. I think the nice thing about sprints is that, for me as a designer, because it's rooted in design thinking, mm-hmm. and it provides this construct to flow through 5 days, mm-hmm. and that, again, I mentioned clarity through constraints and that speed of execution. It gives you an opportunity to go from empathy all the way to testing the idea, and prototyping, of course, is in there inside of that. Whereas lean is focused on build, measure, learn. Mm-hmm. Right? So you start out by building something, and you're going to put it out and then learn from the reactions. As a designer, I'm a big believer in that initial upfront step of empathizing and understanding. When you understand what that problem is and who you're solving it for, and it carries you through that initial slice of the prototype that's just enough to get in front of users. I have a hard time imagining folks who wouldn't want mm-hmm. to move faster and learn more and be able to then iterate. And this is just one way of doing it. It's a methodology that I've embraced, it gets me out of my own decision deadlock as well.
Yeah. So in the wake of that kind of feedback around, hey, how is this going to be any different? You're saying, treat it as a mindset. Hopefully people are willing to adopt a new mindset, or at least test it out. But there are also those who start to get kind of nitty gritty, right? They might say something like, oh, I don't even know where to get customers to test this prototype, or I don't want to bother our existing customers. How do you get over some of those more practical hurdles?
Sure, that's a great question. On the customer front, I think on one hand, you hopefully have a pocket of customers who have a major interest in everything you're doing. Mm-hmm. They want to be those early adopters. They want to test new features. They're your biggest fans. So on one front, you can always start with them, and then treat them right. Treat them in a way where you have this open communication with them that we appreciate coming to you because you're such a fan of ours and we're a fan of you, and we want to come bring you our latest and greatest to see, are we doing right by you? Mm-hmm. Are we solving the problems that you need solved? Are we getting the jobs done that you need done through our software or through our product or mm-hmm. service? So I think on that front, you build those ongoing and sustainable relationships with them.
And if it's a new customer base?
If it's a new customer base, I think going back to that understanding the problem mm-hmm. and understanding who. When you understand those two things, it's surprisingly simple to find where they are.
Yeah.
If you understand their habits, you understand their desires and their pains and their struggles, and you understand where do they seek the solution to this problem mm-hmm. elsewhere, you can go to those places.
So do you have an example of a situation where a lot of these practicalities started to add up and people just completely lost sight of making a decision on design sprints?
Yeah, great question. There's an example where, again, I'll come back to the internal learning mm-hmm. development team at Medallia. We had big needs. We had problems to solve in terms of scaling training, especially for the growing sales team, the growing engineering team, which are very common teams that start to spark and grow quickly, and especially globally. So how do we scale training? And practicalities like, well, video's going to be expensive, getting all the equipment, having a studio. Do we even have time to shoot video and do that? People don't watch online learning, so there are a lot of the common, what might be common sense or these truths that we think we have, in our businesses. Mm-hmm. And the reality was when we ran a sprint, it was actually a colleague of mine and I, we ran a sprint.
So how'd you get over that hurdle to actually get them to run the sprint, given these practicalities?
That's a good question. So there were a couple of people who were advocates. They wanted to embrace it.
Okay.
And the challenge was showing that running the sprint and the output of the sprint. The output of the sprint was actually more important than the sprint itself in a way. So because the output, and first they wanted to embrace the approach. They embraced the approach, they wanted to try it, and they wanted to get to that output. So we shared that video with the entire HR organization. And the output, the video itself, was what people focused on. Then when they wondered, well, wait a minute, when did you do this? And how'd you do it so quickly? That's when we were able to say, well, we ran a sprint on it.
Interesting.
And we just shortcut a lot of the decision deadlock, a lot of the concerns, and we did it with an iPhone on a makeshift tripod in this corner office that we blacked out the windows and we were able to just run with it. And it's not the greatest looking video, but it's a prototype. Then people realized, wow, we can go this quickly and this nimbly. Why don't we embrace this and actually try to do more? And the greatest part about that I love the outcome here is that then the head of the team said, great, here's budget to go get the equipment you need on a reasonable amount of money. And why don't we use this corner room more frequently for these videos, and let's run with this.
So that's pretty cool. You basically turned design thinking on its head. Instead of trying to get people to adopt the methodology, just show them the output, tell them about the outcomes, and then when there's a curiosity for how did this all come about, then you can say, we use design thinking.
That's right.
Cool. And I think then people are going to start to embrace it in more sections of the organization or on more projects.
That's right.
Well, that is an awesome insight, Charbel. So for those of you out there who are stuck, feeling a lot of pushback, maybe instead of trying to get people to adopt the methodology, present them with the output and the outcomes and use that to strike the conversation. Thank you for joining us, Charbel. And for our audience out there, how can they get in touch with you?
Great. Well, thanks for having me on. This has been a blast. And you can reach me at charbel@madeinpublic.com and visit madeinpublic.com and see the projects that I'm working on, the sprints that I run publicly to help teach and empower people to run sprints themselves, and sign up for the newsletter as well.
That's it for today's episode of Build. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive more great episodes and short build tips. Ciao for now. This episode of Build is brought to you by our sponsor, Pivotal Tracker.